Denied Cuba's accusation that it is to blame for an extraordinary wave of protest on the Caribbean island. People across Cuba took to the streets on Sunday, venting their frustration over food and medicine shortages and record COVID-19 infections. President Miguel Diaz-Canel said that U.S. economic sanctions were stoking the unrest.
These are the images Cuba's state TV broadcast of Sunday's mass protest. The country is going through its worst economic crisis in decades. Thousands took to the streets of Havana and elsewhere to protest food and medicine shortages. Cuba's President Miguel Diaz-Canel said it was the work of troublemakers. Yesterday, they threw stones at police forces, turned over cars, a totally vulgar, indecent and delinquent behavior. They've gotten the response they deserved. The protests and their scope are almost unprecedented in the history of the communist country. President Diaz-Canel blamed U.S. sanctions for the unrest. You have been carrying out policies that violate the human rights of an entire people for more than 60 years, and you intensify them in the midst of a pandemic. And now you want to present yourself as the big savior? Lift the blockade, lift the 243 measures, and we will see how we get along. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the Cuban regime has no one to blame but itself.
It would show that they simply are not hearing the voices and will of the Cuban people. People deeply, deeply, deeply tired of the repression that has gone on for far too long.
And President Joe Biden expressed solidarity with the protesters.
The United States stands firmly with the people of Cuba as they assert their universal rights, and we call on the government of Cuba to refrain from violence or attempts to silence the voice of the people of Cuba.
Quiet returned to the streets of Havana on Monday, but the calm was forced, not free. Security forces patrolled the capital in large numbers. Mobile internet outages were frequent throughout the day, and access to many social media sites was blocked.
Well, does Cuba's president have any ground for accusing the U.S. of a hand in these protests? We asked William Leogrand, professor of government and expert in Latin American politics at American University in Washington, D.C.
Well, I'm sure he points to the fact that the United States has been spending about $20 million a year in support of opposition elements inside Cuba. But the reality is that these demonstrations were too large and too broad in scope across the island to be strictly the result of any effort by the United States to foment opposition. People are just economically desperate and frustrated right now because there's no food in the stores, there's no medicine in the pharmacies, there's no fuel at the gas stations, and there are now rolling electric blackouts in the middle of summertime. So people are just angry, and the result is this kind of social explosion. The U.S. embargo plays an important role. Donald Trump blocked remittances from Cuban Americans going to their families in Cuba, and that was about $3.5 billion a year in hard currency flow, in foreign exchange currency, that Cuba no longer has. And that affected the standard of living of about 60% of Cuban families, and it meant the government had a lot less foreign exchange currency to be able to import food and medicine. So I think we'll have to wait and see whether this is the first of a kind of a cycle of protests, as we've seen in a number of other countries, or whether this was just one single day's worth of social explosion. But either way, the underlying social tensions and grievances that people have are not going to go away. And so they'll manifest themselves in one way or another.